You talked earlier about disowned selves and how we find ourselves strongly attracted to that which we disown in ourselves. Are there any other ways that we feel attracted or link with other people?
Well, the area of linkage in this way is really the whole study of bonding patterns, which is very dear to our hearts, because relationship is really the playing field where we apply all of these ideas and theories and the method of voice dialogue to understanding what it's all about. So now we're going to be shifting to bonding patterns, which Sidra's going to take you into. She's the bonding pattern lady.
This is going to be what we're going to be working from, the picture of the bonding pattern. First thing I want to say about a bonding pattern is we've chosen the name bonding pattern because it's perfectly natural, it's perfectly normal. Everybody does bonding patterns. They're the way in which a child, an infant, bonds into the mother. It's the son side of a man bonding into the mother side of a woman, and conversely, the father side of the man bonding into the daughter side of the woman.
Bonding patterns are natural ways of relating to other human beings. We're born in the world and we're infants, and we have adults who are parents to us. And we have all kinds of other adults who act in parental roles. So it's a kind of a hierarchy that we're born into in that way. And then as life moves along, we continue to have people who act parentally to us, but we begin then to act parentally to other people, to younger siblings. And as we get older, there's a whole range of people that we're acting as parents to.
So having learned early in life about connecting and bonding in that way, I suppose it's inevitable that we will continue to do that in all our relationships.
Yes. And the interesting thing is we have a tendency to recreate whichever way we used to bond. So that's why you see the same patterns emerging over and over again in your life.
So what happened with the mother, or perhaps the father, is the way we relate to others when we're adults. It's sort of like what a program that's put in and we're bound to that?
Part of the aim of this work is to become aware of what bonding patterns are happening to us on a positive level and a negative level, so that we can begin to have some kind of choice in relationship to them. We are not slave-bound to them. We can change as we become aware of them and unhook from the selves that are dominating our personality and our ways of interaction.
Are they unavoidable in close relationships?
They are like breathing.
Totally unavoidable. That's why we call them bonding patterns. They're totally natural. They're totally unavoidable. They're the stereotyped, natural ways we interact with each other. As Hal said, it's the parent-child relationship. And the bonding is what happens between the mother and the child when the child is born. If the child doesn't bond to the mother, or the mother the child won't thrive. So the bonding pattern is the natural way we give nourishment and we receive nourishment. So it's both hierarchical and the way in which we give and receive nourishment. If you want to think of this too in computer terms, it's a default position. It's what we go back to when we're feeling vulnerable and we need someplace to go to take care of things.
So bonding patterns are essentially parent-child interactions between people. They are perfectly natural ways of being. They are like breathing. They are normal. They may be positive, they may be negative.
We have what we call negative bonding patterns and positive bonding patterns. In the positive bonding pattern, it's as though the good parents bond into the good children. So the good mother bonds into the good son, or the appreciative son. The good father bonds into the good daughter, the appreciative daughter, or the needy child bonds into the parent on the other side. It feels a little bit safer. It sort of feels good. Positive bonding patterns feel safe, good, predictable. We're not saying that they are good, just they feel okay. What don't they feel? They're not terribly alive, they're very predictable. And what happens with positive bonding patterns usually is that they start to get airless. You feel like you're in a house with the windows all closed. And there's just a slight feeling of needing to be able to get a breath of fresh air. The other thing that very frequently happens in positive bonding patterns is the sexuality disappears. If it doesn't disappear, it becomes more ordinary, less exciting, more predictable. It loses its intensity. Third thing that we see in a positive bonding pattern, and this is one of the ways we can recognize we're in one, is we don't react to each other. If I'm in a positive bonding pattern with you, and you do something that bothers me, I'm going to say to myself, is it really worth making a fuss over? Nah. She's really nice. Or he's really nice. I don't want to make a big fuss. So I will, whatever it is, I will screw the tube on the cap back on the toothpaste, or I'll close the cupboard doors, or I'll pick up the clothes, or I'll ignore what he or she just said. Whatever it is, we just excuse it and we don't react back and forth. What happens after we do this for a while? Now, some people live in this forever. And this has been the picture of what, this has been the picture of what a good relationship is. That we're kind of good girl to good daddy, good mom to good son. And we stay very reasonable and rational, and we take care of things that way. But basically, what's going on? What's going on is, if I'm in a positive bonding pattern with you, you're taking care of my child, my inner child, that is, and I'm taking care of your inner child. We're not taking care of ourselves. We're taking care of the other person. The other person's needs come first, and we overlook ours. It's almost as though my child is sitting in your lap, and your child is sitting in my lap. And they totally trust the other person. This is not a totally safe situation. What if she has to get up? What if she has to do something? What if she's tired of sitting in the same position and holding my kid there? Any way that she stops taking care of my kid, I'm betrayed. So that's the danger in the positive bonding pattern, and it's also the basic format of it. That really we're taking care of each other's kids, and we're not paying attention to our own. Let's start with Nancy and John. John is a computer man. He's rational, he's sensible, he works from his mind, he's a little bit compulsive, very, very careful and tidy about everything. Nancy, on the other hand, is a more intuitive feeling type. She's a woman who loves to live in the moment. She's very spontaneous. She sees herself as an artist, although she really hasn't worked to earn money at it. But she sees herself as an artist with an artistic temperament. And they fall in love, and everything is wonderful. Now, we've explained that the primary self is there to protect the vulnerability. When we first fall in love, very frequently, we're not vulnerable because the other person loves us back. So when we're in love and we feel totally accepted, whatever we do is darling and beautiful and marvelous and wonderful, there's no need for anything to come in and protect us. So we're very open. They fall in love with one another. Everything is marvelous. Nancy thinks he is the cutest thing when he gets all uptight and worried about things. And he thinks she's just darling the way she flows and the way she moves through life. For a while, he's eager to take time off. If she calls him up in the middle of the afternoon, he knows it's fine to take an hour off of work. Nothing terrible is going to happen. She tidies up her house when he comes over because she knows he likes a neat house. And even though this isn't the way she usually is, she tidies up a bit because she loves him so much. And she thinks this fetish he has for neatness is cute. Okay, starts like that, goes very, very nicely. They get married. They have a child. They start to get more vulnerable. They start to feel the pressures. They start to feel the pressures of a family and the worries about money.
So why do they become vulnerable after a period of time? What happens that causes that vulnerability to arise?
It's the beginning of the responsibility for another human being. They're okay when it's just the two of them. When they have a child, well, we've got all of the vulnerability that a child brings with it. You know, she's not sleeping as well. She has trouble. She gets a little bit overwhelmed because she's not a big organizer, and she's got this child to add into everything.
Maybe she begins to notice things about her partner that she didn't notice in the first place, but she can't say anything yet. She doesn't want to spoil things, so she keeps it quiet.
Right.
But she's feeling vulnerable about that also. Money is a big thing that people start feeling vulnerable about.
So he'll start worrying immediately because he's a responsible kind of guy about how are we going to send this child through college? I mean, he's not a short-term thinker. He's a long-term thinker. So rather than ask Nancy about it, he starts worrying about it inside. Again, not wanting to bother her with something that he knows she's not really good at. So they start forgiving each other little things, and they stop reacting to each other.
As the man, I take care of her. I'm very tuned into that little girl in her. I love it to pieces. Mm-hmm. And from the positive bonding pattern, I devote myself just completely to making her happy and doing everything I can to see that she shines.
And as the woman, I love that. I just totally love it. He's like the good daddy I never had. And he just takes care of me, and he does all the things that I want him to do. He almost anticipates my needs because he knows me better than I know me, and I just kind of snuggle up to it. And in return, I love him and appreciate him and forgive him whatever it is that might annoy me.
Now, as the man, things begin to change. We have a child now. I'm used to a very, very neat house. I like order, I like structure, and the house is beginning to look like a pigsty, because she doesn't pay attention to those kinds of details that my mother used to pay attention to very strongly, because she created a very, very lovely house. I hold back my feelings. She spends money in a way that I don't like, because she doesn't think about spending money. She just spends it, and that begins to irritate me. So my negative feelings begin to build up inside. I'm still in a positive bonding pattern on the outside. I don't even know that I'm annoyed. I don't even know I'm irritated. And one day I come home and suddenly I say, this is like a pigsty in here. I mean, I can't stand this. Can't you spend some time? What do you do with your time in the afternoon? Couldn't you clean up this place? And suddenly this beautiful, positive bonding pattern shifts at that moment into a very, very negative bonding pattern. And now from good father, I'm negative father. And from good loving daughter, she shifts.
And first I'm just assaulted. I don't know what's hit me. And then I become a little bit guilty and apologetic, and then go into rebel. Rebel daughter and very judgmental mother. I'm feeling insecure underneath, and I become judgmental. At some point, the vulnerability hits. We're not taking care of each other. We're not taking care of each other's children as well as we could, and we flip to the negative bonding pattern. Now, the negative bonding pattern, I am sure you've all experienced at some time or another, and that's where you have this sense of absolute betrayal. He's just like everybody else. He's just like all men. Or she's just like a woman, just like all the other women I've ever been with. And this sense that the other person wasn't really who they said they were. They're really not nice. Okay? And you start to go into judgment of one another. you lose this delicious kind of safe connection you've had, and you either scold each other, judge outright, scream, holler, react, or you withdraw from one another and judge, and it's extraordinarily painful. It's interesting because it happens with such simultaneity, it's almost difficult to say what the point is, because I, as Nancy in my half of the bonding pattern, have already probably started getting irritated with him and feel that his attention to detail at a time like this is really inconvenient and unpleasant and takes me away from enjoying the fact that I'm a mother and I have a child and we can play together during the day. So I've already gotten a little bit irritated. But it's impossible to hold on to the good feelings when the other person goes into the negative. You're right.
And so what happens to the relationship then?
Well, it may take several forms. I mean, this may become just a fight between the two people, and then they may make up and go on. But if they don't begin to become aware of the underlying annoyances that are operating, then it can be the beginning of the end of the relationship, because literally negative bonding patterns of this kind can last a long, long time.
These negative bonding patterns are catastrophic feeling. There's a feeling that nobody can be trusted and that you're all alone in the world and that the other person is horrible and you never want to see them again. Or at least if you're stuck with them, you'll certainly pull back and you're not going to appreciate them anymore.
If I don't pay attention to the selves in me that are operating, if I don't learn about them, I'm not going to be able to do anything. So I have to become aware of the fact that my primary self is really compulsively neat and organized, and I've always been that way, and it has served me well. Okay? I married my opposite. I married my disowned self. From this organized place, I'm very, very judging of her, because she's like an alien creature to me with her easy, laissez-faire attitude about things and taking care of the baby and the house being a mess. Not a mess to her, it's a mess to me. So I have to learn what is my primary self, the organized, compulsively so person, and I have to separate from that. And I must learn to embrace my disowned self, which is her primary self.
My lesson to learn is how to become more organized, how to tidy up the house, how to bring order out of the chaos, how to make a life that's planned, how to start thinking about the future and thinking about the consequences of my actions rather than just being spontaneous, which also has served me very well and has been quite charming and I've enjoyed thoroughly. But it's time now to bring in the opposite, because I've married John, who carries what I'm missing. It's that missing piece kind of feeling where you come together because each of you has the missing piece.
Well, as I embrace this disorganized laissez-faire side and she embraces the organized side, that ceases to be an issue between us. There may be other disowned selves that we have with each other that have to be worked out, but we don't judge each other from that place. There's another piece of work I have to do that's very important and that I have to learn about. When I come into this messy house, I get all upset inside. I actually get scared. Okay? Now, I have to find out why that is, because underneath my attack and judgment is vulnerability. Vulnerability always lies underneath these bonding patterns. So we always have to find out what is it that makes us vulnerable. Well, in my home, my father was an out-of-control person because he drank. Okay? My mother kept the house meticulously as though that were the way of keeping everything safe. When I hit an environment that's messy, I become anxious, I become upset, I become vulnerable. When I don't know that, then I have to go into my neatnik compulsive self and straighten it out or attack the person that's causing the discomfort. So that's job number 2. What is my underlying anxiety in this situation?
and I have a similar job to find my underlying anxiety. I become overwhelmed because I don't know how to organize things. I have never tried to organize things. I have never tried to set a schedule. I've never tried to get control over my environment. I've been used to going with the flow. With a child, I can't do that anymore without risking utter chaos. And as I feel into that, I realize that in my growing up times, my father was a neatnik, interestingly enough, just like John. He was very precise. He was very constricted. He was very demanding of all of us children. And I finally just gave up. I tried and I tried and I tried to please him. And I tried to be a good girl and I tried to keep my room neat. I couldn't do it. I never could do anything good enough for him. So I finally just became a rebel and decided it's enough.
Let's sum up the points so far. The positive bonding pattern is the natural way we give and receive emotional nourishment. Positive bonding patterns change to negative bonding patterns when the vulnerability of the people in relationship is threatened. A negative bonding pattern can feel catastrophic. You may feel betrayed and that no one can be trusted. To unhook from a bonding pattern, it is necessary to identify the primary self in operation and its underlying vulnerability, and then, through the aware ego, to embrace the qualities of the disowned selves involved.
Now, all of these bonding patterns, positive and negative, are triggered invariably by when we disown our own vulnerability, when we disown our own inner child, when we bury it, when we don't take care of ourselves, when we don't pay attention to what we need and what we want to do, what we don't want to do, and we just don't take the basic care of ourselves and our lives that we should be.
So there's a big change that takes place in this relationship, you see, when we can both claim our vulnerability and share it with each other. You see, when I can say to her, look, I know that you like a house that's easier, but I have to tell you that I really get scared when I come in and everything's messy. Now, when I say that to her, she's not going to polarize.
But for somebody to do that, they would have to be aware of the anxiety in the first place. Right. For most people who have difficulties in a relationship, they are totally unaware there's anxiety involved.
Right. That's right. Because the vulnerability is probably the most buried of all of our selves.
So it's easier to stay in a negative bonding pattern and leave each other than it is to deal with the underlying anxiety.
It is easier because you feel stronger. You feel right, you feel righteous, and you feel like you've done something to master the situation because your primary self has rescued you from it.
So how do you actually become aware and accept the vulnerability and accept being wrong, in inverted commas?
Well, we look at this as no fault. There's no right, there's no wrong. That's the beauty of the bonding patterns. If you look at the picture of John and Nancy, he's not wrong and I'm not wrong as Nancy. We've each got a piece of the puzzle.
And we have to do our work then. People have to do their work. They have to learn about vulnerability. There are, at this point, probably 183,495,000 books on vulnerability, okay? There are groups that you can go to. There are friends that you can share your vulnerability with. I mean, whatever the work is that we have to do, it's out there now and available to us. But consciousness does not come without cost. It costs time, and it costs energy, and it costs money. I mean, you have to do what you have to do. Vulnerability is a number one step, and learning about these disowned selves is a number two step. It has to be done by all of us.
If somebody is in a relationship which isn't working, and they are totally convinced they are right, one party, and the other party feels that there is something that can be done, how can you persuade the other person who is absolutely certain that they are without any fault?
Well, I'll try that one. I would say the one who feels that, let's say the woman feels that she's responsible as well as the man, I would say the trick would be for her to start some process, whether it's therapy or seeing a marriage and family counselor or whatever it is. Let her start her journey first. And very often when she begins her journey, she can help the man to get into it. But if somebody remains stuck in the idea that one person is right and one person is wrong, that's fairly primitive from our standpoint. And if they stay locked in that, then basically the marriage is not going to work.
So it has to be two people willing to do the work, really.
There has to be two people who are willing to do the work. I cannot
Sooner or
tell
later.
you how much time we save when we get into a bonding pattern. I mean, in the old days, we would worry about, you said this, I said this.
If you hadn't been, if you hadn't been vulnerable to start with, it wouldn't have happened to me.
But now we get into a bonding pattern. We never get into a business of you said or I said. We know that it's a dance.
And if we find ourselves doing that, we stop it. We say, okay, now we're in a bonding pattern. What's the matter? What's going on?
Yeah.
So just by beginning to discuss the issues is a very good step.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Also, learning how to share your anxieties and fears. I mean, when you learn how to do that, that makes a lot of difference in a relationship. I mean, that really takes the sting out of a lot of negativity.
Yeah, if you just play back this particular thing with Nancy and John, if either of us was able to share the real feelings in a very open way, this is what is bothering me, it's a whole different ball game from you're too neat or you're too sloppy.
Is there a language that has to be learned?
Yes. We have three aspects of a bonding pattern. We have the form of the bonding pattern. Now, the form of the bonding pattern, as we could see it, is who we become. In the beginning, we had a positive bonding pattern. Positive bonding pattern doesn't mean it's good, it just means it feels pretty good. In the positive bonding pattern, John was the good father, Nancy was the good mother. His good father took care of Nancy's good little girl, who really appreciated it and snuggled up. Nancy's good mother took care of his little boy, who was a little bit scared, and he snuggled up and loved it. That's the positive bonding pattern. That's the form of it. Then vulnerability struck. The vulnerability that we spoke of, his vulnerability of the responsibility for a child and the money, her vulnerability of not knowing how to handle things. The vulnerability is the second aspect of the bonding pattern. That's very important, because the vulnerability always triggers either positive or negative bonding patterns. And in this case, the vulnerability forced the change from the positive to a negative. At that point, a power mother comes in, a judgmental, colder, withdrawn power mother who starts to look at John with totally different eyes and finds him lacking in many ways that the loving mother never noticed. This power mother makes her feel stronger. And so she looks at him and sees that he's a fuss budget. He's all worried about details. He could drive me crazy. It's like having two children in the house to worry about. And she gets very judgmental. When she gets judgmental, her judgmental, angry mother hooks into the child side of him in a negative way. Just like before, the good mother and the good son had a lovely, sweet relationship, just so her judgmental mother comes in and hits the part of him, the little boy that's frightened and feels inadequate and overwhelmed. He doesn't like that feeling. So he doesn't stay with that feeling of fear and overwhelm, but he moves into a very judgmental father. And from that position, he looks at Nancy with very cold, angry, unforgiving eyes, looks at the house, looks at the child, looks at what she's doing, and finds her lacking, and starts to criticize, and really in a very hateful way. As that makes her feel bad, because that angry father hooks into my frightened child. She doesn't like that. She doesn't like to feel inadequate. My mother gets angrier and angrier.
The inner mother.
The inner mother. And they're at each other. So each negative parent is really beating up on the little child in the other person.
And it's an ongoing escalation that takes place that could reach very, very major proportions. And a lot of things can happen and a lot of things can be said in these major escalations that can be very, very damaging to relationship.
A lot of divorce comes from here, a lot of pain, and this is where you have that catastrophic feeling that there's no place to go. And there really is no place to go, because as long as I, Nancy, am looking at John through the eyes of that mother, he looks dreadful. I don't want to be with him. As long as he's looking at me through the eyes of that father, he doesn't want to be with me. And who can blame us? So as Nancy, I'm carrying John's freedom, his spontaneity, his flow. John, as my disowned self, is carrying the organization and the discipline and the thoughtfulness. These are the qualities that the selves that are involved in the bonding pattern are scolding about. So exactly what I'm judging about him, what he's judging about me, those are the disowned selves we carry for each other, and that's the third aspect of the bonding pattern. So we're looking for who do we become, what is the weakness or vulnerability that triggers everything, and what are the disowned selves that we carry for each other that are really the lessons we have to learn from one another. Learning from these bonding patterns really gives you a chance to go back and heal the old ones, to break old patterns, to integrate the disowned selves that the other person is carrying, and to learn what the needs and the vulnerabilities are. What are those little wisps of reaction, of needs, of feelings that we ignore in our daily lives?
So we're going to start by giving some examples of bonding patterns that we have had to work through in our life, okay? We're going to give you a few of those, and then so you can begin to get the feeling of how they work. We are experts on bonding patterns because we have had them all many times over, and we have spent a lot of time working with them.
That's how we found out about them, because we'd explored the selves, and when we got married, we found ourselves, after a while, getting into the same patterns with each other, and calling, as we'd been with our previous spouses, and calling each other by their names. And since we were both very different from previous spouses, we figured we were onto something, and this is the way we found bonding patterns. So anyway, let's find a good one to start with.
I'm going to start with one we had very, 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 very early, even before we were married, and that was about money.
Oh, that was a good one.
Okay, a lot of people have this in relationship. I had started the Center for the Healing Arts in Southern California, and I'd gone into debt, and my primary self was spiritual. And if I felt that God wanted me to do something, I did it no matter what it cost me personally, and no matter what the cost was to my family. I just didn't think about the cost. I figured I can always make a buck and take care of things, but I never thought about my family in the long term.
In contrast, I felt like I had this teeny little purse. We used to kid about it, and all my money was in it, and I'd open it very carefully and think about everything before I spent any money. And I spent a lot of time thinking about when I'm older, I want money in the bank, and was extraordinarily cautious about purchases.
Okay, now she was judgmental of me. That is to say, her German lady who kept her purse very tight,
very little,
was very judgmental of me in my spiritual primary self, that spent money on things that I felt my spirituality required.
And in return, he was very judgmental of me and thought I was really tight because of my teeny little purse.
So in my spiritual wisdom, I had gotten into debt to about $20,000 or $30,000. I borrowed it from my pension plan, which was illegal at the time. But we won't talk about that. Anyhow, we were getting married, and I wanted Sidra to refinance the house to pay off my debt so that we could get a clear start. And this one evening, we were in a restaurant in Southern California, and we had a couple of martinis. And you have to understand, we really loved each other a lot.
And we would do anything for each other.
We would do anything for each other. And I told her that I really felt badly that, you know, I understood it was my debt, but, you know, why couldn't she, you know, get this debt cleared away? It wasn't that much of a sacrifice. $20,000, $30,000 wasn't that much money. Now, Sidra, who you have to understand how much she loved me, you know. She looked me in the eye. This is after 2 martinis. You can do a lot after 2 martinis.
The primary self of loving mother who would give him anything dissolved.
She looked at me and she said, Hal, she said, I wouldn't give you a nickel. She said, any money that I would give you would be like pissing it down the drain. They're applauding.
Thank you.
Now, I would say that we got into a fairly negative bonding pattern, okay, at that point. Okay, now, we had a terrible fight, and I was, of course, deeply hurt. And then when I was deeply hurt in those days, I went on a rampage, and Hitler came out. And I really attacked her for her brutality and her
my selfishness
abusing me.
And my
in those days we didn't use
nature, and that I wasn't spiritual enough. And
in those days you didn't abuse people; you just beat them up. You know what I mean? Anyhow, we had a big fight, and
of course, I attacked him back with his total lack of responsibility and forethought and consideration of his life and his family.
Okay, so. What was, let's take the first point there. Who was I?
The form of the bonding pattern.
So I began as the son,
yes.
And then where did I go from son to negative father?
I went immediately into rebel daughter and a very judgmental mother.
That's the form of the bonding pattern. My vulnerability was I had a lot of anxiety about the money. I was running the Center for the Healing Arts. I was running my private practice. I was working 92 hours a week. I was saving humanity, and I was inordinately vulnerable in this situation because I had to carry these 2 programs, and I was feeling very, very overwhelmed, but I really didn't understand the depth of my own vulnerability, so I couldn't communicate that to her. Okay? So that was my underlying vulnerability that I couldn't communicate. Okay?
And my underlying vulnerability was I had 3 kids, and I wasn't earning that much money at the time, and I was really concerned about being the sole support of me and of them, and felt that I had to be very, very, very cautious. And I was scared to death that he would spend every penny I had if I turned it all over to him. So that was my vulnerability.
That was her vulnerability. So her vulnerability, you know, at a deep level was, Jesus, she could marry this guy, this crazy man, who gives his money away because he feels he's in a cause. You know, that's a very scary thing for her. Okay. So disowned selves and primary selves. Okay. So what, in that situation, my primary self was what? Spiritual, and you do whatever you have to do from that place. What was my disowned self? My disowned self is her German lady
with the little purse.
Keeps a tight purse.
Very pragmatic.
I didn't know from tight purses, you see. What was her disowned self?
Spirituality, and somebody who could just spend money, looked at money with a lot more ease.
I have to unhook from my spirituality. Not give it up. I've never given up my spirituality, but I had to separate from it. It couldn't rule my financial life. My identification with spirituality was keeping me a child. It was keeping me a son to the world of business and finance. You see? So I was spending, I'm not saying that what I did was wrong. I did a tremendous service. But to have gone on, identified with spirituality, and spent my money when I'm entering into a relationship with this woman and her 3 children, plus having to support my 2 children, we had 92 kids in college at the same time. I mean, it was ridiculous. So if I had lived on in that spirituality, I would have destroyed the relationship. By the same token,
By the same token, I had to learn to loosen up and realize there was some abundance in the world and not to hold on so tightly. I had to get a bigger purse, something bigger than this, to be opening up and figuring out what to do, because I couldn't enjoy money. I couldn't enjoy spending it. I was always holding on to it and being extraordinarily careful with it. So getting in touch with something bigger, with this bigger picture, with abundance, with spirituality, with trust in the universe, was really something that I needed to be able to do. And it was a wonderful gift. But we each needed to do our own homework rather than one collapse into the other. See, we each had a wonderful gift for the other. If I had gone over to Hal's side, that wouldn't have served me. And it wouldn't have served him. And if he had come over to my side, it wouldn't have served me or him. We each needed to take a little bit of the other and integrate it.
this was one that we worked through very, very quickly. I woke up the next morning, and it was as though someone had taken nightshades off my eyes. I mean, it was as though I had been blind, and I woke up and I said, my God, I can't believe this, you know, because I saw so clearly where I had been. I had really unhooked overnight from my primary self. And within really 2-3 weeks, we had absolutely solved this one. Money has never, ever again come up as an issue between us, and it was pretty hot.
It was like a miracle.
Then. Yeah. Okay.
And I loosened up, needless to say. As he, you know,
she spends a lot more than I do.
Now I do. Now I. It's a very good one to integrate.
Let's sum up the points so far. It is essential to learn about your own vulnerability. Otherwise, you will be constantly thrown into either positive or negative bonding patterns. In a bonding pattern, we need to know 1. Who we have become, which self we are playing. 2. What is our vulnerability or weakness that triggers everything? 3. What are the disowned selves we carry for each other that are the lessons we need to learn from each other? Learning from your present bonding patterns really gives you the chance to 1. Heal your old patterns. 2. Integrate the disowned selves the other person is carrying for you. 3. Discover your own inner needs that you normally ignore in daily life.
One of the interesting morals to this story is that in relationship, the things that you judge the most are your disowned selves. So if only as couples people realize that, what a difference it would make when they get into these fights and arguments where judgment is always a major part of it, to realize that the judgment is the judgment of your disowned self.
So really what they're doing is judging themselves, not the other person.
Exactly, exactly. I think it might be helpful to look at some other examples so that we get a chance to see all the different kinds of selves that get involved in bonding patterns, because they really are fun. I mean, they really are fun.
Once they're over, they're fun. They're not much fun when you're in the middle of them.
That's a good point, yeah. Really, in a bonding pattern, it's pretty deadly usually, and when they're over, that's when humor comes in. But one of the ones that's very common today is what we call the psychological parent. Now, everybody who gets into consciousness work develops this psychological parent. And the psychological parent is the part of us that knows what's wrong or what's going on with the other person. And usually when that psychological parent in us is talking to the other person, look out, because there invariably is a highly polarized reaction on the other side. So, a good example of that. Let's imagine that Sidra is talking on the telephone to one of her daughters. And I'm in the other room, and it's near, it's lunchtime, and she's talking for about an hour and a half. And I'm feeling upset. So she gets off the phone, and I walk into her office, and I sit down, and I say to her, are you aware of how long you were talking to Marion? Sounds like an innocent question, doesn't it? Nice innocent question. Actually, I do it much better than that when I'm really there. You know what I
You
mean?
sounded pretty good. It gave me that sort of inside of my guts.
And she
say no.
suddenly jumps at me, you know, and has this enormous reaction.
Because I feel like he scolded me. You know, the words were perfectly innocent, but I feel like I've been attacked and I want to attack him back.
Is it the energy underneath that?
It's the energy underneath it. I feel that I've been judged.
Once again, it ain't what you say, it's who says it that determines the energy underneath what's going on.
What do you mean by who says it?
Well, in other words, in any kind of communication, you can say the same words to a person, and in one case you get a tremendous polarization, like with this psychological parent, and in another, if another person says, if an aware ego says it, it's fine, you see. So you're always trying to figure out underneath who's talking. You see,
Which of the selves is talking?
Exactly, which of the selves is talking. So, so she gets very angry, and I said, what are you angry about? I mean, I have an observation to make. I just, you know, you spend a lot of time with her, and I think that you need to look at the tie to her. I mean, psychological father.
Makes me very defensive as a daughter.
Now let's replay that, okay? So what is the underlying vulnerability? Well, for me, something happens when she talks to this daughter, and I feel left out. So that's my vulnerability. I feel abandoned. I feel left out.
Why do you feel left out?
Well, I don't know that yet. Because if I go to her and I sit down and I say, Sidra, look, I want to share something with you. Whenever you talk to Marion, I feel left out. No, I don't know why I feel left out. I don't know what's going on. But something happens to me, and I'd like to understand it. I don't know what it's about. Well, she's not going to get polarized if I do that. There's no basis for a bonding pattern.
No, I'd feel differently. Then I'd be in a position to look at it. I don't feel attacked. You could sense the difference.
Would that throw you into Mother, though, if he came to you with that sort of...
Well, that's a very interesting observation. It would throw me into Mother if he said, I don't understand, and he was being vulnerable, and he was being an abandoned son. I would invariably go into Mother and rescue him and say, oh, I promise I won't do it again. I feel bad, you know, I'd feel bad that I'd hurt him. But if he comes, as he did in this example, with the energy of an aware ego, with, let's look at this, something's happening, then there's, again, that feeling of no blame, and I'm not responsible for him.
But if he was in aware ego and had conscious enough to be in aware ego, why would he come to you with that feeling?
An aware ego is very connected to vulnerability and power. It's the beauty of an aware ego is you have both going for you. See, when I go to her from that place and I say, look, I got some kind of a problem here. This is what's happening to me. That's not being identified with vulnerability.
You can feel he's not weak.
You see, so the aware ego has the gift of being able to bring in power and bring in vulnerability.
Wouldn't he know, if he was in aware ego, that it's just part of himself coming up, and therefore he wouldn't necessarily feel it vital to communicate that? He'd just say, oh, well, that's just my vulnerability. I know it's silly. The mind would come in. What's the point of sharing it?
Well, we really don't know at all what my reaction is about at this point. I don't know what the basis of that is. I have to find out about that. So there's work we can do. I mean, we could at that point sit down with each other and do work with me or later that day and find out why does that feeling come now? What is it about her connection there? And we might discover, for example, that she is too connected to that daughter, literally, and that somehow my reaction can teach her that she is in a bonding pattern with that daughter. You see, in other words, we don't know what we're going to find. So the communication of the vulnerability doesn't bring out the polarization. You have a chance to talk about the issue.
And the communication of the vulnerability through an aware ego doesn't make me responsible for the vulnerability. It gives me a chance to stand back and both of us look together.
The second issue here is, what are the disowned selves in this interaction between us? We've got the vulnerability, that's there, and I've communicated it. Why is it that I would judge her for being on the phone too long? Okay? The disowned self would be that I, as a parent, am not too much into parenting. I don't spend a lot of time on the phone talking to my kids. I don't take that as seriously, whereas Sidra, as a primary self, would be much more parenting, spend much more time, take it much more seriously, you see. So literally, I would have to begin to embrace my maternal parenting side that would pay more attention to that kind of communication, you see. And she would have to learn to embrace the part of her that knows how to be less involved with her children, more impersonal, you see, so that we can meet each other, both of us carrying that pair of opposites. Then it ceases to be an issue between us.
So the advice is that whenever a vulnerability or a feeling of weakness or anxiety or anything at all of that nature comes up, it's wise to communicate it rather than bury it.
Yes,
Basically.
yes, and yes one more time. In a relationship, we must learn how to do this. But the key in training is learning the difference between becoming the vulnerability, which will always bring good parent or bad parent, and learning how to bring it in through an aware ego, where I have my power and I have my authority, but I also have this feeling of vulnerability.
And what is the way we know the difference between whether he brings it through his becoming the vulnerability or an aware ego is my reaction to him. If I don't feel responsible and I don't feel blamed, then it means he was in an aware ego. If I feel responsible or blamed, it means he came from son asking me to fix him or asking me to pay more attention to him than to my daughter. If I'm trying to communicate, what Hal just said, that really hurt me what you did yesterday, or that you didn't want to give me the money. You see, there's no hook there. I could communicate it from mother, which would be, that really hurt me what you did yesterday, that you didn't give me the money, okay? You could just feel a whole different energy. Pulling for a guilty child. I might get a guilty child, I might get a rebel child. Or from child. You could communicate it from, that really hurt me what you did yesterday when you didn't give me the money. And you're pulling for daddy. So we start to learn with these by the reactions of the other person. Who is talking? Where did the words come out? So we need to learn to communicate vulnerability, and we also, with paying attention to these bonding patterns, learn who's communicating it by the reaction of the other person. Relationship is amazing. It's like a biofeedback mechanism. I don't pay attention to my own heart rate. If I go into a biofeedback machine, or get hooked up to one, it's going to show me what my heart rate is, and I'm gradually going to learn what's going on unconsciously all the time. I'll be able to get a sense of it. The way my partner reacts to me is the same way. If I behave in a certain way, I'm unconscious of it. I can tell by what Hal gives back to me what I'm doing or where I am. Who's talking? If he speaks to me from psychological father, I'm going to go into daughter. If he speaks to me from a needy, vulnerable son, I'm going to go into mother. You could say the precise same words in different cells or from different places, and they're going to have a different impact. What would this look like? Say that Hal goes to town. He goes for an Aikido lesson, and I know the lesson is over at 10 o'clock, and I expect him home by 10:30. And I've asked him to call if he's going to be any later than that, because it's a long, lonely country road between there and here. And he doesn't call, and he comes home at 11:30. Now, I'm feeling vulnerable about that. I want to share my feelings with him because I've studied about this, and I know if I share my vulnerability, we're going to be able to discuss it, and we're going to be able to come to some kind of conclusion about what we do. So he comes home, and I could say it 3 ways. I can say from mother, from disapproving mother, I just want to share my feelings with you. I was very upset when you weren't home when I expected you to be home, and I would like it very much if you would call me if you're going to be late. Now, if I reported that to my girlfriend the next day, I don't know why he got all upset. I just said to him, I want to share my feelings with you. I got upset when you were late, and I wish you would call me when you're going to be late. I don't know why he blew up. Okay? But it was the mother.
I would blow up, though. You can be sure of that.
Anybody would blow up. Okay? So the words are fine. I'm sharing my vulnerability. But who says it is off. I can also share from daughter. And I could say, I just want to share my feelings with you. When you were late, I got very worried, and I wish next time you'd call me if you're going to be late. Immediately, I would have to throw him into father, who would feel, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, I'll call next time.
Or, much more likely, a killer father who wants to eat up that little daughter because I recognize the communication isn't real at some level.
And then I could share from an aware ego, where I would just say, I'd like to share my feelings with you. When you were late, I got worried, and next time it would really help if you would call. No hook. Okay? So the words can sound perfect. I always think of people in that situation. I always think of people going back and telling their therapist the next day, but all I said was I wanted to share my feelings.
Let's sum up the points so far. The psychological parent is the part of us which always thinks it knows what is going on with the other person. Relationships are biofeedback mechanisms which give constant and instant feedback to each person in the relationship about the selves they are expressing and disowning. When a feeling of vulnerability arises in a relationship, it is essential to communicate it to your partner rather than be thrown into a bonding pattern. It is vital to understand the difference between A, becoming the vulnerability, which throws you into a bonding pattern, and B, bringing your vulnerability in through an aware ego. Your partner's reaction, if they feel responsible or blamed, reveals whether or not you are in the vulnerability rather than in the aware ego.